The void between stars holds countless stories, but few are as remarkable as the tale I'm about to share. I've told this story in bars across a dozen systems, and every time someone accuses me of embellishing, I wish I was. What happened on that moon changed everything I thought I knew about humans, and about survival itself. The Stellar Winds wasn't much to look at, a Class 3 bulk transport vessel that had seen better days. We were a small crew of 8, our slug captain, with their questionable decision-making, our felid medical officer, Dr. Sahira, myself as cargo master, and 5 others, including our peculiar human crew member, Howard. Howard stood out from the moment he joined our crew. While most humans who ventured into space chased prestigious positions as pilots or engineers, he seemed perfectly content loading crates and maintaining basic systems. He had this strange habit of whistling while he worked, a piercing sound that drove our captain to distraction. "How can anyone think with that noise?" Captain Zulurm would complain, their eye stalks wobbling in irritation. But Howard just kept whistling, kept working, and kept doing something else that puzzled us all. He exercised. Every rest cycle, you'd find him in the cargo bay, lifting heavy containers for no apparent reason. "Gotta stay in shape," he'd say when asked, wiping that strange human moisture from his forehead. "Never know when you might need the strength." Dr. Sahara found his behavior fascinating. She'd often observe him while pretending to conduct routine health scans, her pointed ears twitching with curiosity. "Humans," she'd mutter, always preparing for imaginary emergencies. Like what you're hearing, make sure to give this video a thumbs up and share it with fellow space enthusiasts. Life aboard followed a predictable pattern until that fateful day. We were 17 hours into our final approach to Nexus Station, cruising at standard FTL speed through what should have been empty space. I was in cryosleep along with 2 other crew members, standard procedure for long hauls. The first sign of trouble came when our forward sensors detected something unusual. Our captain, distracted by a medical alert from the cryo bay, missed the critical warning that would have given us time to alter course. By the time anyone realized what was happening, we were already plowing through a debris field at speeds that turned microscopic fragments into lethal projectiles. The first impact tore through our hull like tissue paper. I remember the screech of tearing metal, the sudden silence as atmosphere vented into space, and the flickering of emergency lights that cast everything in a hellish red glow. The ship's artificial gravity generators started failing, section by section, creating a nightmare landscape where up and down changed with every step. If you're enjoying this space survival story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales from across the galaxy. I was still in cryo when Dr. Sahira pulled us out into chaos. The air was already thin and she had to plug my breathing spiracles with emergency sealant before I could even move. Through the haze of cryo fog, I watched her rush off to save the others, her fur standing on end from stress. Only 3 of us had survived the initial impact, myself, Dr. Sahira, and Howard. The rest of the crew, well, space shows no mercy. The ship was dying around us. Warning klaxons screamed silently in the vacuum, and structural integrity alerts flashed on every functional display. We had minutes, maybe less, before the reactor containment failed. I started making my way toward the escape pods, my legs still half frozen from cryo. That's when I saw Howard. He was sprawled on the deck, clearly disoriented from the emergency thaw, but there was something different about his reaction. While I was fighting blind panic, he seemed to be analyzing the situation. In the time it took me to process my next move, he was already on his feet, helping Dr. Sahira, who had collapsed nearby. "We need to move," Howard's voice crackled through the emergency comm system. "The reactor's going critical. Follow me." The next few moments are burned into my memory with perfect clarity. Howard, this supposedly simple cargo handler, took charge like he'd trained for this moment his entire life. He got Dr. Sahira to her feet and started guiding us both toward the escape pods, compensating for the shifting gravity with an agility that seemed impossible for a species without an exoskeleton. We reached the escape pod bay just as another explosion rocked the ship. The pods themselves were ancient A-23F models, the kind of equipment that makes you question your life choices. Howard didn't hesitate. He yanked the emergency release, practically threw both of us inside, and somehow managed to squeeze in after us, despite the pod being rated for only 2 occupants. The launch was violent. Howard, who hadn't had time to secure himself, slammed head first into the bulkhead. Blood, bright red and alarmingly copious, started flowing from a gash on his forehead. Yet, even concussed, he managed to input the launch sequence before losing consciousness. That's when we learned our destination and my heart nearly stopped. The pod's primitive navigation system had locked onto the nearest habitable world, a protected moon called Bolana. To most spacefaring species, Bolana was a death trap, high gravity, dense atmosphere, and an ecosystem that made predator planets look tame. As our pod streaked through space, I watched the stellar winds disappear in a spectacular explosion. Dr. Sahira tended to Howard's head wound with our limited medical supplies, her paws trembling as she worked. The human remained unconscious, but his breathing was steady, a small mercy in our rapidly deteriorating situation. If you're finding this tale of survival fascinating, take a second to smash that like button. Your support helps us bring more incredible space stories to life. The journey to Bolana felt endless. Every creak of the pod's hull made me wonder if this would be the moment we'd break apart. The temperature inside steadily rose as we hit atmosphere, and the pod shook violently during descent. When we finally splashed down in what appeared to be an ocean, I was certain we'd jumped from one death trap into another. Through the pod's tiny viewport, we could see two suns hanging in an alien sky, their combined heat already making the pod's interior feel like a cooking chamber. The water around us teemed with life, shapes moving beneath the surface that I desperately tried not to think about. Beyond the shoreline, a wall of vegetation rose up like a living fortress, and the sounds, by the broodmother, the sounds that emerged from that jungle haunted my nightmares for cycles afterward. It was Howard who surprised us again. He regained consciousness as we were debating whether to open the hatch, and his first reaction wasn't fear or despair, it was excitement. His face split into what humans call a smile, showing those unnervingly white teeth, and he actually laughed. "Oh man, this is perfect," he exclaimed, pressing his face against the viewport like a hatchling seeing space for the first time. "Look at that biodiversity, and those rock formations. We can use those for shelter." Dr. Sahara and I exchanged worried glances. The head injury must have been worse than we thought. But Howard was already moving, gathering our supplies and organizing them with practiced efficiency. He explained his plans rapidly, talking about water collection systems and shelter construction as if we were planning a pleasant excursion rather than fighting for survival. When he opened the hatch and the first blast of humid air hit us, I nearly retreated back into the pod. The atmosphere was thick enough to chew, heavy with the scent of decay and life and something else I couldn't identify. Howard took a deep breath and grinned even wider. "Smells like earth after a summer rain," he said, as if that meant anything to us. "Come on, we need to get our gear to higher ground before that storm hits." He pointed to a mass of dark clouds approaching from the horizon. I hadn't even noticed them, too focused on the immediate threats around us. But Howard was already moving, splashing through the shallow water with our supplies in tow, heading for a fallen tree trunk that would become our first shelter. The first night on Bolana taught us exactly why this moon was classified as a death world. As darkness fell, the jungle came alive with sounds that made my exoskeleton rattle. Bioluminescent creatures skittered through the undergrowth, and something large enough to shake the ground moved in the distance. Howard had spent the remaining daylight hours constructing what he called a basic camp. He'd used the pod's emergency tarp to create a shelter against a fallen tree trunk, positioning it at an angle that seemed random until the rain started falling sideways. He'd also gathered an alarming amount of vegetation, sorting it into piles based on criteria I couldn't understand. "See these marks on the leaves," he'd say, holding up various samples. "When you see this pattern, it usually means the plant's toxic. But these ones with the waxy coating? Probably water-resistant, great for roofing." Dr. Sahara watched him with professional curiosity, her medical scanner humming as she analyzed everything he touched. "How do you know these things?" she finally asked. "Your personnel file listed no survival training." Howard laughed while stripping bark from a fallen branch. "Ever heard of the Boy Scouts? No? Well, on Earth we teach our kids how to survive outdoors for fun. Plus, I spent a lot of time camping with my dad. He always said nature's trying to kill you, so you better learn its rules." The first attack came just after sunset. A pack of 6-legged predators, each about Howard's size, emerged from the tree line. Their eyes glowed in the darkness, reflecting the light from the gas giant hanging overhead. Dr. Sahara froze, her fur standing on end, while I raised my claws in a defensive posture. Howard calmly reached for one of his makeshift spears. "Don't run," he whispered. "They're testing us. Running marks us as prey." He stood up slowly, making himself appear larger, and began making a deep, rhythmic thumping sound by striking a hollow log with another piece of wood. The predators hesitated, clearly confused by this new creature that neither fled nor showed fear. Howard suddenly charged forward, shouting and swinging his spear. The pack scattered, yowling into the darkness. I couldn't believe what I'd just witnessed. "They'll be back," Howard said, returning to the fire he'd somehow created by rubbing sticks together. "But now they know we're not easy prey. We'll need to set up some perimeter warnings. Anyone want to learn how to make primitive trip alarms?" That first night set the pattern for our survival. Howard seemed to treat every lethal challenge as an interesting puzzle to solve. When we discovered the water was too salty to drink, he created a solar still, using the pod's transparent panels. When strange fruits started falling from the trees, he developed a system for testing which ones were edible. On our fourth day, Howard's weather prediction proved accurate. The rain began. Not the gentle drizzle we'd experienced earlier, but sheets of water that turned the ground into soup. The local wildlife went berserk. Everything from tiny flying creatures to massive beasts we could only hear crashed through the jungle, fleeing something. That something turned out to be the flood. Within hours, our elevated position became an island. But Howard had anticipated this, having noticed signs I still don't understand, something about soil composition and plant growth patterns. He had already moved us to higher ground and secured our supplies. "This is just like that time in Yellowstone," he said cheerfully while lashing together a floating platform from fallen vegetation. "Except, with more aliens." Dr. Sahira's scientific curiosity eventually overcame her fear. She started documenting the local flora and fauna, using Howard's surprisingly extensive knowledge of survival biology as a guide. Together, they identified several edible plants, though Howard insisted on testing each one on himself first, despite our protests. "Look," he explained while chewing on a purple fruit that made my mandibles ache just looking at it. "Humans are really good at not dying from weird food. We've got these things called liver and kidneys that filter out most toxins. Plus, I've got a gut feeling about this one." The flood brought new challenges and new predators. Aquatic hunters began circling our island, their scaled backs breaking the water's surface like moving islands. Howard watched them with fascination rather than fear, studying their patterns and behaviors. One night, as we huddled around our carefully maintained fire, Dr. Sahira finally asked the question that had been bothering both of us. "Howard, how are you so calm about all this?" Howard poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks into the dark sky. "You know what's funny? Back on Earth, this is what some people do for fun. We call it extreme camping or wilderness survival. Sure, Earth's predators are smaller and we don't have two suns, but the principles are the same. Observe, adapt, survive." He grinned, that unsettling human expression that was becoming oddly comforting. "Besides, this is actually easier than that time I got lost in the Australian outback. At least here the spiders aren't venomous, I think." As if the flood and regular predators weren't enough, our 10th day brought us face to face with what Howard later dubbed the big boys. The first sign was the way our regular visitors, the six-legged hunters we'd grown accustomed to, suddenly vanished. Even the massive aquatic predators retreated to deeper waters. They came at dusk, three enormous creatures that made our previous challenges look like hatchling play. Each stood taller than our shelter, with multiple rows of eyes that glowed like burning coals. Their bodies were covered in armored plates, and they moved with a terrifying intelligence that spoke of experienced hunters. "Those," Howard whispered, "are proper apex predators." He was grinning again, that crazy human expression that now meant we were about to do something either brilliant or suicidal. "Notice how they're working together. Pack hunters but smart ones. They're trying to figure out what we are." Dr. Sarawa's fur was standing completely on end. "We should hide in the pod," she hissed. "We can seal the hatch." "No," Howard interrupted, already gathering specific items from our supplies. "That's exactly what they expect prey to do, corner themselves. We need to show them we're not prey at all." What followed was either the bravest or most insane display I've ever witnessed. Howard began setting up what he called a shock and awe defense. He mixed chemicals from our medical supplies with local plant sap to create smoke bombs. He positioned our remaining emergency flares strategically around our camp. Then he did something that made both Dr. Sahira and me question his sanity. He started preparing to attract their attention. "Predators like these," he explained while coating spears with a phosphorescent fungus he'd discovered. "They're used to being at the top of the food chain. Nothing challenges them. Nothing fights back with strategy. We're going to change that." Howard's plan was as simple as it was terrifying. As the massive predators began their coordinated approach, he put us into position with clear instructions. "When I give the signal, make as much noise as you possibly can and light everything we prepared. Don't run, don't hide, just be as big and loud and bright as you can." The apex predators were mere meters from our position when Howard let out a war cry that still haunts my nightmares. A primal, thunderous roar that seemed impossible from his small human frame. That was our signal. Dr. Sahira activated the emergency beacon's strobe light while I struck our makeshift drums. Howard threw the first smoke bomb, which erupted in brilliant blue clouds. The predators hesitated, their multiple eyes blinking in confusion. That's when Howard launched into Phase 2. He ran straight at the largest one, waving burning branches and screaming like a demon from the void. The creature actually backed up, clearly baffled by this tiny prey that was charging instead of fleeing. "Don't let up," Howard shouted, his voice carrying over the chaos. "They're confused. Confusion means fear. Fear means retreat." The next few minutes were pure madness. We deployed every trick Howard had prepared. The flares, the smoke bombs, the phosphorescent spears that made us look like glowing giants in the darkness. We beat drums, roared and moved in patterns Howard had taught us that made our small group seem like a larger force. The apex predators began showing signs of stress. their coordinated attack pattern broke down. When Howard managed to strike one on the snout with a burning branch, it let out a high-pitched keen that seemed to shatter the air itself. That was the turning point. See, Howard laughed maniacally as the massive creatures retreated into the jungle. Every predator has a prey response. You just have to find it. After they left, we collapsed around our fire, adrenaline, or our species equivalent, still coursing through our systems. Dr. Sahira was the first to speak. "Howard," she said, her voice shaking, "that was either the most brilliant or most insane thing I've ever witnessed." That night changed everything. As we sat around the fire, still trembling from our encounter, Howard began explaining how humans had evolved as persistent predators on Earth. His casual description of how his ancestors would chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion made me see him in an entirely new light. "You see," he said, poking at the fire, "humans aren't the strongest, fastest, or most naturally armed species on Earth, but we're adaptable, we learn, we figure out patterns. Most importantly, we're really, really stubborn." Dr. Sahira's medical scanner hummed as she studied him. "Your heart rate barely elevated during the encounter," she noted with amazement. "While Braxton and I were in pure panic, you were enjoying it?" Howard laughed. "Adrenaline rush. Humans are kind of addicted to it. Why do you think we invented extreme sports? Some people jump out of perfectly good aircraft just for fun. Loving these insights into human nature? Don't forget to hit that notification bell." The next few days brought a dramatic shift in our survival dynamic. The apex predators never returned to our territory, but their retreat had earned us a reputation. Smaller predators gave our camp a wide berth. Local herbivores began grazing closer to our shelter, seemingly recognizing us as neutral parties rather than threats. Howard used this relative peace to expand our survival operations. He taught us how to make tools from the pod's materials, how to preserve food, and even how to predict weather changes by watching animal behavior. Every challenge became a lesson, every problem an opportunity to innovate. "You know what's funny?" he said one evening while showing me how to weave stronger rope from plant fibers. "Back home, people pay good money to learn these skills. Here we are getting a masterclass for free. Ready to hear about their incredible rescue? Drop a comment below and let us know." On our 15th day, as Howard was teaching Dr. Sahira how to make waterproof containers from large leaves, we heard it, the distant hum of engines. A salvage vessel had picked up our pod's data flare and followed the signal to Belhana. Their rescue team, fully equipped for hostile environment extraction, repelled from their ship expecting to find corpses or desperate survivors. Instead, they found us sitting around a fire, eating roasted local fish seasoned with herbs Howard had deemed safe. We had shelter, clean water, and even a small stockpile of preserved food. The rescue team's leader, a Rigelian with impressive cybernetic enhancements, couldn't believe what he was seeing. "How did you survive?" he asked, his optical sensors whirring as they took in our camp. "This moon has killed experienced survival teams before." Howard just shrugged, that casual human gesture we'd come to know so well. "Oh, you know, basic Earth Scout stuff. Anyone want some fish? I figured out this great way to cook them with these blue leaves. Adds a nice spicy kick." Our rescue made waves across the galactic community. The footage from the rescue team's cameras went viral on the interstellar networks, showing how 3 castaways, particularly one resourceful human, had not just survived but thrived on one of the most notorious death worlds in charted space. The Interstellar Safety Council held special hearings about our experience. Howard's testimony challenged everything they thought they knew about survival protocols. While they had focused on developing better emergency beacons and rescue procedures, he argued for teaching basic survival skills to all spacefaring crews. "Technology can fail," he told the council, "but knowledge weighs nothing and never runs out of power." Dr. Sahara's medical data proved equally revolutionary. Her detailed scans showed how Howard's body had adapted to Bolana's challenges, processing toxins, maintaining homeostasis in extreme conditions, and even developing resistance to local bacteria. The human immune system became a hot topic in xenobiology circles. Fascinated by human biology? Hit that notification bell to catch our upcoming series on human adaptability. The shipping company that owned the Stellar Winds offered Howard a prestigious position as their new safety director. He turned it down. Instead, he used his newfound fame to establish the first interstellar survival school, teaching beings from across the galaxy how to survive when technology fails. I visited his school last cycle. The sight of Rigelians learning to make fire, Philids practicing shelter construction, and even slugs figuring out water purification would have seemed absurd before our time on Belana. Now it's becoming standard training for deep space crews. Want to join Howard's survival school? Leave a comment below telling us which survival skill you'd want to learn first. Howard still teaches most classes personally. He's added some modern touches, holographic demonstrations, xenobiological safety protocols, but the core lessons remain the same as what he taught us on that moon. Observe, adapt, survive. The last time I saw him, he was showing a group of wide-eyed students how to read weather patterns. "You know what's funny," he said, catching my eye. "Humans spent thousands of years trying to separate themselves from nature, building bigger cities, better technology. But out there in space, the most valuable things we have to share are these primitive skills we nearly forgot." These days, whenever I hear someone dismiss humans as primitive or technologically backward, I just smile, because I know something they don't. In the right circumstances, one human with basic Earth Scout stuff is worth more than all the advanced technology in the galaxy. And Howard? He's still Howard. Still whistling while he works, still treating every challenge as an interesting puzzle to solve. But now, thanks to our experience, the galaxy is finally beginning to understand what makes humans so special. Not their technology or their strength, but their incredible ability to adapt and survive. Thank you for joining us for this incredible tale of survival. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more amazing stories from across the galaxy. Share this video with your friends, and let us know in the comments, what would you have done in Howard's situation?